Hold a press conference on Monday addressing the latest indictment unsealed in Georgia. He has until next week now to turn himself in to face those charges, along with the other 18 people named in that indictment.
So unlike the other indictments, there's a good chance that cameras will actually be allowed in the courtroom for these legal proceedings, and all 19 defendants could be booked at the county jail. So joining us this morning with more insight on the charges and the legal proceedings is Fordham Law professor Cheryl Bader. So good morning, Professor Bader. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning. It's nice to be here.
All right, so let's take a look at this indictment. It highlights 161 separate times that Donald Trump or the other named defendants conspired to break the law. Now, Trump claims that he's going to release what he calls an irrefutable report that will clear his name of election fraud charges. So based on these charges, what will that report actually need to consist of to prove that he, like he says, that he is innocent?
So this is quite a sweeping indictment. It's chock full of allegations and facts. And usually we see a defense lay low, see what the prosecutor is going to put forward, because the prosecutor has the burden of proof in the case. But, Trump is not your usual defendant. And if he says that he's going to be issuing some report, I think this shows his strategy of trying the case in the court of public opinion. And we'll probably see more of the rhetoric that we've already seen. In other words, that there was indeed voter fraud, that the election was stolen from him, and that this is all a political witch hunt.
This is happening on the state level too, right? So can you walk us through the process of how this may differ from other states, right? Georgia requires mugshots, and there's this whole idea that they could be booked in the county jail. Does that still happen with a former president?
Well, so he has been treated with kid gloves in most of the arraignments that he's had so far. And it sounds like in Georgia, they're saying, they're not necessarily going to do that, that they want to treat him like, anybody else. I mean, this is a man who has, tremendous privilege and has used it to his advantage. And, perhaps that's going to stop here.
Can you explain this, though? Because what sets this indictment apart are those RICO charges, the RICO charges, right? So it gives prosecutors a lot more power to prove their case. Can you explain that a little bit? And also how you just said earlier that the proof is also not on the prosecutors, but on the defendants.
No, so RICO, which is Racketeering Influenced Corrupt Organization Act, was originally in place to try to capture mob bosses. Who would often be able to evade prosecution because they would run the organization, but they didn't get their hands dirty with particular crimes. And so we think of this as an umbrella crime. There's an overarching scheme here to overturn the election, and that various crimes were committed in furtherance of the other crime. And it does have quite a few advantages for the prosecutor. They take a very expansive, fuller approach in terms of getting in particular pieces of evidence that they might not otherwise be able to get in because they refer to a different defendant, those statements or, those acts. So, and it allows the prosecutor to give the jury a fuller picture and context for the case. But the prosecutor does have the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt in any criminal case. And that includes a RICO prosecution.
For anybody who follows New York City politics and the history here, former Mayor Rudy Giuliani, was also named in this indictment. He was a federal prosecutor who used RICO to take down members of the mob back then. Now he's facing 13 charges, right? So how serious are the charges? And what are, say, Rudy Giuliani's legal options here? Because he's now claiming he's already out there saying, I was just his lawyer.
Right. So, it's really interesting because here we see this, celebrated prosecutor and mayor, and what a fall from grace this is. But, Rudy Giuliani is right in the thick of it, and it'll be interesting to see how, Trump's defense, maybe I was relying on my lawyers, and, Giuliani may be saying, hey, I was just sort of the lawyer here. But he was right in the thick of things, and I think some of the most compelling evidence is going to be against Rudy Giuliani. For instance, having those poll workers who have been, sort of harassed and whose lives have been upended, testifying about, what this did to them, I think is going to be very compelling evidence and
Yep.
dramatic for the jurors.
What kind of defense could he have, though, as a lawyer for Mr. Trump?
Right. So he can be, he might argue, I was just giving my opinion as to what, actions one could take under the Constitution, and that I was not, in fact, instructing anybody to commit any crimes. He
But
might
there's the
argue,
tape,
of course.
right? There's the call with the
Absolutely.
they find the votes.
Right. I think that's a great smoking gun. And I think the prosecutor is going to want to put that evidence, right up in the center. And, Rudy Giuliani, he was, intimidating people and threatening people. Those are the allegations. So I think it's going to be a tough case for him.
And the DA says that she plans to have all 19 defendants in the same courtroom. That could be a circus-like atmosphere. Do you think that's actually going to happen? What are the chances?
So it could happen. It's very complicated to have that many lawyers, that many defendants. It also delays the case. Possibly they're all going to be making motions. They all have to look at all the discovery. But, they also may be pointing fingers at each other. And sometimes that could be cause, to split up the defendants and what we call sever the case. But these will all be pretrial motions, and the judge will have to decide how to go forward. But I think it's very ambitious for the prosecutor to think that she's going to be able to try this case, within 6 months, particularly given that many of these lawyers are also, representing Trump in other cases as well.
Fordham Law professor Cheryl Bader, it's amazing to think of this historic moment where a former president who's running for re-election is now going to be crisscrossing the country in different courtrooms for different indictments and different court proceedings. Thank you for your process, your analysis to break down the legal process this morning. It is chock full of information, so appreciate you.
It's nice to be here.
And we will, of course, continue to follow the criminal investigation, everybody, and cases against Mr. Trump here at Pix 11. We'll also have in-depth analysis of the charges against Rudy Giuliani and the others on our website, pix11.com.